Hello, listeners. Today, the pleasure of speaking with Owen Reader, who is a professional storyteller and the CEO of Indelible Studios. Owen is an expert in the psychology of narrative, where he helps brands and communities understand how stories influence perception, embed memory, and inspire action. So, this episode, we talk about how you can rebuild after losing everything. We talk about burnout, bankruptcy, identity collapse, and what it really takes to rebuild when everything falls apart. Get kind of deep. We talk about living fearlessly and what it really means to find the courage to create the life that you want. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Welcome to the Live Fearlessly podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Ritter, and it's time to get fearless. Can you say
Indelible.
indelible? Okay, thought that. I don't know why I was trying to pronounce it a different way. What does that mean?
Indelible means unable to be forgotten, removed, or erased. So it's the idea of permanence in an impermanent world. How do you help people to remember who you are, remember what your brand is, or move on your message? We study a lot of the stories that come from oral traditions first, like older stories, Aesop's fables, Grimm's fairy tales, Arabian Nights. Obviously, we study scripture quite a bit. Um, and I think when you look at the way that story is told and was retold and remembered and repeated through time before anyone had any paper to write it down on, I think you can learn a lot about how the mind actually processes information. And we've, as a society, have created a whole bunch of systems to deliver bullet points, 140 characters or less, that kind of thing. When our minds have evolved for thousands of years, and even I would argue have been designed to uh, receive, send, repeat, remember information in the shape and form of a story as opposed to a fact. So, indelible and story are, to me, are very closely tied topics, I guess you might say.
Well, I talk about this a lot with people. This like, oh, I can remember this, or I got to listen to this podcast or read that book. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's important to learn, 100%. It's important to learn. But listening to the thing or watching the thing is different than learning. It's like, oh, you listened to a podcast last week. Oh, it was really interesting. Who was who was the guest? What was their name? Oh, can you tell me like a couple points that they shared? And it's like, oh, no, I just felt really excited about it. So this name, like the way that you described it, it's so powerful. And this concept that, yeah, we learn through stories, we remember stories. It's like any sort of presentation, start with a story or start with a question to engage the memory. Uh, where did this idea come from? Were you like, were you telling a story around a campfire when it came up? But what was the birth of the name?
Yeah, like I think so. Indelible initially launched. Our focus was in the cannabis space, and not just cannabis, but we worked in psychedelics as well, and at times nicotine and alcohol. We were sort of interested in the contentious spaces, and I had written a book that was sort of a futurist look at like what's it, as the cannabis industry came online legally across states, different states in the US and across the country in Canada. We were making some predictions about what is that first like 4 or 5 years of going from an underground subculture into like the mainstream, and what does that look like commercially when you take something like that that's got like some very deep roots in the culture, and then you try to make it accessible, available, appealing to a mass audience. And the predictions essentially in the book were like, hey, it's going to be a messy first like chapter in the industry. But if you're actually serious about starting a brand and a business in this space that's going to last forever, you just have to behave differently. and you need to look at the examples of the brands that have actually managed to last. And so that was kind of the premise of it at the beginning, was really focused around the cannabis space. But my whole career, I've worked with cult brands. I was a part of the strategy team at an engagement agency called Cult, and so we did a lot of study of like the brands that have been around for, across the century mark, like the Levi's of the world, the Carhartts of the world. One of my favorites is Filson. This is my like Filson shirt. It's like I just love the brand. It's been around for like, yeah, it's 100+ years. Helped to settle the West. They fueled and outfitted people for the gold rush in Alaska and stuff like that. And all these brands, when you think about like how much culture has changed in the last 10 years or 15 years, it feels staggering to consider, a brand that's been around for 180. And how much culture would have changed over that period of time as people got electricity, like basics, stuff that we consider very basic today, or as people got broadcast TV, or even before that, radio. So many things in how we consume information and how information is shared, or how we spend our time, has changed. But these brands have managed to maintain a position of relevance in market, and I find that inspiring. And I think to me, it was just kind of like a curiosity that I just kept picking at. So since then, we've stopped working in the cannabis space, and we don't really center ourselves around contentious categories anymore. But the principles that made our thesis accurate for that industry are still very much the principles that we bring and apply to the work that we do today for people that are trying to create a lasting impact. Um, yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but basically I'm a nerd about it. I nerd out on brand history and stories, and I think I sort of, our team folds that up into the work that we do.
So what are some of the pillars that you're just like, okay, did we do this to create something that more than likely is not going to be forgotten, removed, or erased? Like, so have we told a story? Sounds like, have you been around 100 years? Have you, it's like you can't go back in time, but it's, yeah, what are some of those ideas or concepts that you really try to like integrate into your work as you're building, almost like, I guess would another word be like a memory or legacy or impact?
Yeah, I would say if I was to bring it down to one factor, it would be your disposition around change. I think that there are a lot of narratives and stories that are being told right now that make change feel like something that is being done to us, or are stories that are reacting to a change that's happening in culture, and that's not the business of an indelible brand. An indelible brand will uh, tell stories that create change, and they're driven to create change. And so, and this is not a philosophy that's, unique to us. I think Simon Sinek uh, really popularized the idea of starting with why. What's the purpose? What's the purpose? And purpose really is about driving change typically. And so, when you look at these brands that have, created something good and then managed to adapt it and evolve it through culture, they were at the front lines of cultural change. That Levi's started as a workwear brand for people working on the railroad, but fast forward to the 1990s, and they're in hip hop street culture, and they're speaking to the way that art form is changing, and that kind of thing. Carhartt started as, like, again, very family run, still is family owned, but family run workwear company. Very quickly adapted to military, and then after the Second World War was over, they adapted to veterans and those kinds of things. So they were trying to create change as they went. They were very aware of what their purpose was, and had stayed consistent to that purpose and expressing it willfully in culture at large. I would say there's a lot of other factors too. Having a good product helps. Like, I think that generally speaking, if you're putting lipstick on a pig, it's going to be hard to last for 100 years. But if you're bringing something of quality and in particular enduring quality to the table, that's different. Coca-Cola is another example. Coca-Cola changed the way we look at Christmas. Christmas was not a commercial enterprise before Coca-Cola started to commandeer the idea of Santa Claus and the holiday season and giving gifts and those kinds of things. Gifts were a side bar to the Christmas tradition until they started to subvert and change the way that culture viewed it and made it more. So I think there's tons of examples of it, but what at the center of it is the brands that have endured have made change, and they drive that change through a very deep sense of knowing and purpose led decision making.
I'm going to make an assumption that might not be true, but the way that you're speaking about Indelible sounds like there's some connection or aspect to maybe you and your personal values or how you live your life. Or I would love to take this conversation and kind of zoom in on you for a second and be like, well, what do you then do in your own world to, like, what do you feel is important? Like, are you working towards, not being to being an indelible human, or like what drives you to do what you do and be who you are?
Yeah, that's interesting. If we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I would have said, yeah, I'm looking to leave an impact that lasts, 5 generations or 8 generations. I think most people's legacies last about 3 generations, and by the time they get to the fourth, they're not thought of very much because we're relational creatures. I don't think that way anymore as much. I think like there was probably quite a bit of ego motivation behind that previously, as I was really trying to think about what my impact would be. The short answer of what motivates me now is the most enduring characteristic is the truth, and the truth is something that you cannot add to or take away from. It is just the truth, and that's why one of the reasons why it endures. And to me, this is a very I'm on a faith-based mission. I don't just work in faith areas. I think that there's truth to be told for brands that are not necessarily like a Christian organizations or whatever, but the truth came in the form of Jesus Christ, and that's the most enduring thing this world has ever seen, by a long margin. And I think that as I continued to stare down the idea of history and enduring legacies and that kind of thing, it was an inevitability that I would come back to the realization that it's actually already been solved. Like it actually was Christ at the center of the whole thing. So that's a little perhaps esoteric, but when it comes down to like whether is it my legacy that I'm concerned with, less so now. I think like I rest in the peace and the calm assurance that it's not my legacy. It's the legacy of the story that God has been writing across all of human history, and I just am grateful to play a part in it.
I'm so curious, like, where does this originate from? Like, where were those defining milestone moments? I work with a lot of different individuals who, some of their truth is, I'm not good enough, or I'm never going to be successful in my career, or I can't quit my job and start that company, or no one's ever going to love me. And so like, when he said the word truth, it was really interesting because I was like thinking back to some of these conversations with clients where I was like, truth is subjective. Like you can think that you're not good enough, but you could also think that you're good enough. Like you can think that you don't, like, it's like and it's all up to interpretation. And why not you choose the interpretation that's going to serve you the most? And so I would love, like, what comes up when I just ask, okay, so where did these values, these moments come from? And I imagine there's some twists and turns along the way, but what stands out the most to you right off the bat?
Yeah, I think if you had asked me, 5 years ago, the same question, it would have been very self-motivated, self-referential. My idea of truth was my truth. And you're shaping your own narratives and hoping and striving for the world to conform around that. And I was I experienced like a significant disruption, and it was a full, page one reset in my life. I was pursuing this path of uh y- entrepreneurship and impact, and again, very self-focused in my pursuit of those things. And it blinded me to quite a number of areas of my life that required attention. And I think one of those was sort of my family. I became aware that the pursuit that I was in was actually taking me away from the things that actually are going to last beyond me, which is like my kids, for instance. And I also got to a place of just like ultimate burnout. Like the fuel, whatever it was that was fueling me, just ran out. The supply ran out, and I was left in a spot where I had very very little. We were effectively bankrupt for a period of time. We had to shut the doors of the original version of the agency. I had to do significant resets relationally, not just at home, but in other really important relationships around my life. And you can't encounter that like it's like, I don't want to say it's like smashing into a concrete wall. It's more like getting T-boned at an intersection. You can't encounter that amount of disruption that just kind of happened all at once without you know having to give your head a shake and sort of re-evaluate what good looks like. And it was in that evaluation of what good looks like that I centered and refocused on uh I think the foundations of my faith probably started in as a child. Like it's in traditions that I grew up in. And but I think as an adult, coming back to it and exploring it in a way that um you know looking for how it actually worked today, rather than how I thought it worked when I was a kid, and that sort of thing. And yeah, I think it's interesting. You're striving for creating permanence for people, and you just end up in a spot where you're like, you've lost everything, and you're like, well, this feels hypocritical. Like, you're I thought we were supposed to also be good at it for ourselves too, not just for other people. So yeah, it was an alarming period. It was a painful period. It was a very humbling period of time. And I'm so thankful for it, in the sense of how it recalibrated me and gave me a much firmer foundation to build on moving forward. You start to think, well, if I do want it to last, like, what are the things that have lasted? And if you really answer those questions honestly, I think there's objective evidence to the permanence of some of these things that I think we sort of overlook as like older traditions, maybe.
Yeah, I'm very happy that I got my, oh man, everything burned to the ground when I was a lot younger. Like I feel like we kind of have to be like nature, where every so often things just kind of have to be burned to the ground to be to regrow,
Yes.
healthier,
Yes.
feed the soil again. Especially if we've been feeding the wrong parts of our life. Like, oh, we just get imbalanced. Especially if you're a builder in some way,
Yes.
shape, or form. If you're working towards something specific, it's it's just so common, like all these major successful individuals are like, yeah, you got to go at least bankrupt 3 times before you end up making any money. It's like, oh, okay. And I think that it's funny, like, so we have like an associate's degree or a graduate degree or like a 4-year degree or something like that. I'm thinking about this in terms of like reinventing self. Like the one good thing
Mm.
in terms of like school that I feel like I like to use as a comparison is when you're ready to change something or something is not working, it does take anywhere from like 2 to 4 years, and
Mm.
at least in my perspective. And you basically are just going to school again. You're going to the school of life again. Like everything burned down. You're starting from what you think is nothing. You're not sure anything's going to work out again. But the healing and the rebuilding, or just the kind of redefining who you want to be and who you're going to become, and then building it takes time.
Mm.
And when listeners, if you're in this space of, I don't know how I'm going to rebuild, like you have the tools, the materials all around you. You've done it in other parts of your life before, and now you're smarter, and you know that you have like a different, maybe more clear, maybe healthier end goal. And I hope listeners kind of take where you were and say, oh, if I am there, I can rebuild. I can get to this new place that I'm not sure ever will exist. Because sometimes that hope can leave us.
Yeah, so interesting. It's I love, by the way, I love these common experiences. Like, it's so interesting to me that that's like a share there's a share there's something you can go through that makes you feel so alone, where it's very much like you against it, and you're navigating it by, you think, by yourself. But then when you kind of resurface and you actually bring it to words or talk to somebody else about it, people are like, "Oh yeah, I went through that." And it was like almost identical, very different circumstances, but identical experience of those circumstances in a way. Yeah, if any of your listeners are in there, I think like one of my things that I took away from it is just like put one foot in front of the other. Just don't stop moving. Keep moving. And it doesn't mean sprint to some false idea of a goal line. There is no goal line. You but don't stop. And I think like the absence of hope is where people stop. Hope is the thing that drives us forward. Oh, if I do this, it'll be better tomorrow, even if it's just this tiny amount better. Um, but I think it's, you can make tremendous progress taking one step a day if you just do it every day and keep going and keep
Yeah.
going and keep going. So yeah, there's these seasons that we walk through that people connect via, and they get into them in different ways. They come by them by different, yeah, like I said, different circumstances. We all get out of them the same way generally, and it's by continuing to take steps forward, whatever step towards hope we can.
That hope. And going back to that degree idea again, it's like, if you knew in 2 years you would graduate to the next version of your life, or if you knew in 4 years, if you knew you'd graduate, would you feel better? Would you put that one foot in front of the other? Would you be able to live not in the past and not in the future, but today, and be able to live it to its fullest?
Mm.
And so you mentioned uh, that your word of the year was courage. And okay, I would love to hear where this stemmed from and what that led to you actually kind of facing in 2025, if you're open to sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the word of the year practice is something that one of my mentors gave to me. I think he originally maybe got it from John Maxwell. And the idea is that you pick a word and you slow study it. And so you just take it for the year. And my practice generally is I journal a little bit every day, and then once a week I journal with a little bit more depth, and then you know once every quarter a little bit more, and then once a year I do a very deep uh, full year review. And so in that full year review, what I have is sort of like a record of experiences that many of which will focus around my encounter, my learnings with that word. And so for 2025, the word was courage. And one of my observations right off the bat was that if you pick you got to be kind of careful about the word you pick, because it exposes you to different things. And so I picked the word courage, and I'm thinking about courageous action, and all of a sudden it sets this filter in my life where I'm seeing a lot more fear, or experiencing a lot more fear. And it showed up in a lot of different ways. Like I think at the beginning of the year, I was, um, it was even in like dreams. Like I was having dreams that were where I would just, the kinds of dreams where you're just like wake up and you're like, and your heart is pounding, like you're not even really sure why, but all your senses are elevated, and it's kind of like fight or flight sort of thing. I was having those kinds of dreams like fairly regularly. I don't often have, you know, really visceral dreams like that, so it was a little bit unusual. Um, I would also find myself at the beginning of the year, like I would be making, coming up to a decision and finding myself, you know, uh, aware of what negative thing could happen on the other side of a decision, and then having to like navigate through inaction or hesitation and pessimism versus optimism and positivity and those kinds of things. um and so I would say like the the first thing that I would say is like fear is a liar in your life. Most of the things we're afraid of are not actual real things to be afraid of. Most of the things that we're afraid of don't actually come to pass. They don't come to fruition. And I learned that as I became aware of as I journeyed to courage, I became aware of my fears. And then through reflection, became aware that those fears never materialized. And so instead, then you look with hindsight vision at something and you're like, well, I waited for a week or 2 weeks or a day or an hour, whatever it might be, to make that decision out of a fear that just absolutely never materialized. Um, and so I think like disrobing fear and just like recognizing it for what it is. And then, it allowed me, I'd say, to develop new strategies for it. um, I don't look at fear the same way that I used to a year ago. I look at it now more as even like a steering mechanism. If I feel fear about something, I look closer. I don't avoid that anymore. I try to confront it more directly now. I think about fear as a compass towards the thing I'm actually supposed to be doing rather than the thing I'm distracting myself with. So if I'm distracting myself with something that makes me feel comfortable, it's probably not the habit that's going to lead me closer to fulfilling my purpose on earth. Whereas if I feel fear towards something, it's probably signaling that there's an identity piece there, that there's a piece of, there's an invitation in fear that beckons me closer to my calling, closer to my purpose. And I try to be aware of it in a much more mutual relationship now, where I think about yeah, looking for it rather than trying to avoid it. But then I also have tried to develop a habit, and I continue to try to cultivate a habit of expecting the best outcome. Like, I expect the best outcome from this conversation, and anything that I do, let's expect the best from it. Let's expect it to be your best episode, or let's expect it to be really fruitful for me too. Like, that kind of mindset tends to lead to a much better results. And then as you build those results up, the courage becomes a default because you just expect it. You expect to win.
Yeah, fear doesn't dictate outcomes, right? It's a signal, it's a bit of information to do with what you will. I love this concept of like think that it's gonna be the best thing and like go into it. And despite the fear, it's like, oh wow, I feel this thing that's telling me something, but this is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be the best conversation I've had all day. And Owen, I'm gonna say that it is. So I hope that you think so too. No more
Yeah, likewise.
conversations after this one.
Yeah, that's my last one too. Yeah.
Yeah. So then what then did that lead to? Like we're done with the year. And if courage was last year, you now have it sounds like you've redefined what fear is and your approach to fear and your approach to life overall. I guess what comes next after that?
Yeah, I think the I did a little reflection on this morning, and I'm going to post it on LinkedIn here shortly. That we don't know how long we're here for. None of us know the number of our days, and I don't feel particularly mortal at the moment. I'm not fighting like a life-threatening illness or anything like that, but I just am aware that um, we're given our time on Earth, and it's a short amount of time, and relatively speaking. And so I don't want to waste it. I I I don't want to waste it hiding. I don't want to waste it in fear. I don't want to waste it sort of circling an idea. I want to go directly towards an idea. I want to express my will more intentionally in the world around me, and I think like that is courageous to me. And I don't mean that in like a self-congratulatory way. I don't think I've won this yet. I still deal with fear. I still have to sort of make the mental calculations to go and do the thing. But I do know that I'm motivated to live a life that's all in. I don't want to get to the end and think, if I should have just taken that shot. I should have emailed that person or picked up the phone or had that conversation or tried that thing, expressed myself in this way. Like, I don't want to live a life where I was half committed or spent time thinking rather than doing. Like, I want to I want to I want to have an impact, certainly, just as I did, well before, I kind of had my recalibration. I want to live a life of impact, um, but I don't think about it as just solely for me anymore. And I also don't, and I keep grounded in my faith on it. Like, if I am in my purpose, if I'm in my calling, and I am um, following it with an authentic and humble spirit, then I can trust that there's nothing that would stand in the way of it. There's nothing that can stand in the way of what God is calling me to do with my life. And that is straight from scripture. It's not just a platitude. It's a truth that has been applied to millions of lives before mine and has been found to be true. And so I think, fear is one of the things that causes us fear. Fear may not have real consequences uh, in other than it stops us from pursuing something that we would inevitably be victorious over. So courage allows us to go and encounter challenges with a different kind of disposition. And whether we succeed in the way that we think we will or not, if we keep going and it's one foot in front of the other, we will find victory with that philosophy in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been given life to live.
Yeah.
So if our listeners want to follow how you're living, you mentioned posting something on LinkedIn and they want to check out your company and build a brand that is indelible, how do they find out more about you?
Yeah, you can check us out at indelible.co. That's indelible.co. We couldn't afford the M. And you can check me out on LinkedIn. I post there fairly regularly, and our studio has a couple of shows that we post about on our Instagram and on our LinkedIn. One of them is called Buffaloed, and that's a show about finding the Western spirit, understanding what it is that made the West what it is today. And then we have a couple of other things that we support up there, and people that we work with and stories that we're excited to tell. So yeah, if you want to see the stories that we're telling, you can go there.
Oh, and thank you so much for your time, for your stories, for your wisdom. I look forward to having another one in the near future.
Yeah, likewise. It's been an enjoyable conversation. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Now get out there and live fearlessly.